Josh Null here with Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, coming to you from Fairhope, Alabama, down here near the Gulf of Mexico. I'm joined, as always, by Matthew Eickman, the National Retirement Practice Leader for Qualified Plan Advisors. Matthew, how you doing?
I'm good, Josh. How are you today?
I'm doing great. You and I are going to get to discuss something, topic that we both hold near and dear, financial wellness. So, Matthew, what I'd like to do, because we're going to be coming at this pretty strong, we'll go ahead and kick it over to you. Where do you think we need to start in our discussion about financial wellness?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, Josh, you and I were kind of looking through what type of information we wanted to share today. We realized that it probably starts with a bit of a definition of what that term even means. I feel like it's probably used a little too frequently and too vaguely. And so let's start by trying to understand what financial wellness means by taking a look at the way that term has evolved over the last few years. As I think about it in the retirement plan context as a starting point, I think back in around 2015, and you started to hear a lot about plan health, right? And it was so focused on a retirement plan. And at that point in time, the concept of wellness was more attached to like a medical plan. And so wellness meant, did I take enough steps? Do I have a gym membership? Is there some sort of discount that I can get on that membership by meeting certain, health and wellness achievements or objectives? Well, then we get into about 2016, and all of a sudden employers started to think of wellness, and they said financial wellness. Well, that's kind of interesting. In 2017, that started to pick up some speed, and in 2018, some companies started to implement programs, and others have said, hey, we're looking at it really heavily. And last year, Josh, and it seems like a decade ago, I guess, to think back to 2019, but more and more employers across the country were saying, yeah, we've put one into place, or we're putting one into place right now. And then what happened? I don't know what happened, right, in the first 2 to 3 months of this year, but all of a sudden we hit early March of 2020. And then this is what really caught my eye. This is what really helps us to understand what financial wellness is, or better yet, what it isn't. Think back to the CARES Act. Think back to how hard it is for our two parties to work together in Congress to get anything done. But yet, what did they do with the CARES Act? Within about 1 or 2 payroll cycles of American workers starting to be hit by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the CARES Act is passed, and suddenly employees have access to what? Up to $200,000 from what is intended to be their long-term retirement savings vehicle. And so when we think about whether employees were financially well coming into that, we can see that they weren't. They weren't ready for the type of calamity that we've experienced. They weren't ready for the type of emergency that people experienced in March and in April, and unfortunately some have continued to experience now. So Josh, when I think about all of this, I don't know yet that I've gotten to the point of saying what financial wellness is, but we know what it isn't, right? We know from all this information that financial wellness isn't being in a situation where people need money that quickly. But instead, I think what financial wellness means is that people are at a position where they have a sense of confidence and security in their financial situation. And there's a short-term and a mid-term and a long-term perspective to all of that. And I think you and I will dive into that a little bit today, the way in which it's not just one point in time, and it's not just one of their particular savings vehicles or financial instruments. It's whether an individual has that sense of confidence and security in their short-term, mid-term, and long-term financial needs.
Matthew, do you think that a lot of people do a good job of holding themselves accountable for their own financial wellness? But when you're talking about a large number of employees, a large number of employers, and particularly during what we experiencing on, how important is it to have a company-wide philosophy of finance? Does that play into what we're trying to accomplish here? And you think that would have impacted maybe how some of this played out?
Yeah, well, the short answer is yes. And I think if you'd asked me that a year ago, I would have said, yeah, I think so. And you ask me that now in 2020, and the answer is definitely. What we I think can learn a little bit from the pandemic is the degree to which an employer, the owners of the company, the leaders of the company, the management team needs to genuinely buy into the importance of wellness and not treat it as kind of a check the box item. It's really interesting if we go back to think about where the unemployment rate was, just several months ago and how hard it was to compete for labor. Well, a lot of employers were saying, hey, we're going to start putting in a financial wellness program because we need that to be able to compete in the labor market. We need that to be able to attract people to come and work for us. Well, now what we're seeing is merely putting some program into place so that they can put it in their recruiting brochure. Who cares, right? I mean,
Right.
eventually, hopefully we'll get to a point again where that's important. But what we're seeing right now is the organization needs to say, we're not doing that to check the box or to have some sort of token program. We're doing this because our people need to be financially well, and we need them to be well in order for them to succeed and our company to succeed. So, I mean, Josh, that's one of the biggest lessons from the pandemic. And I think for anybody who's a business owner or on a management team of an organization and listening to us today, hopefully they're realizing that, I mean, this needs to be genuine. This needs to be a real program, a real philosophical commitment that they devote resources to and they hold people accountable for whether it's working. And so, yeah, the answer is yes, but as you can tell, it's even more than yes. It's absolutely, absolutely critical for companies to buy into it.
Well, and as you said earlier, Matthew, with checking the box, I think that there has been certain systems offered that says, hey, here's financial wellness, watch a couple webinars and do a short survey at the end and congratulations, now you're financially well. So in your experience, what do you think actually falls under the umbrella of a good financial wellness program? Is it broader than just the 401k?
Yeah, that's another great question. And again, the answer is yes. It certainly is broader than the 401k plan or a 403b plan. Now, before I get into that, though, it is important to note that, I mean, that's a great starting point. That's a great foundational point. When we think about, remember I mentioned earlier that short-term and the midterm and the long-term implications, we do want to take care of that long-term. And we do want employees to feel like that when things get kind of volatile and topsy-turvy in the short term, that there's some stability and some certainty out there for them in the long run. So yes, the retirement plan is a starting point. But let's think about it this way. Let's take an employee who's 35, saving really well into the retirement plan, building up a nice sized 401k balance at that age, getting the match from the company. So a lot of 35-year-olds, let's say, married and has a couple of children. So at that point in time, it wouldn't be rare for an American 35-year-old worker to have a mortgage, 1 to 2 car payments, 1 to 2 student loan payments, starting some sort of 529 account or a savings vehicle for their children. Their children are maybe starting to get into sports, which they're realizing, oh my gosh, that's really fun, but it's really expensive. And they see that their monthly expenses are climbing at a faster rate than their income is climbing because of the age of their children. Do we really think that that person lies down on a Thursday night and sleeps comfortably just because he knows that in 24 and a half years, he has the ability to pull money out of a 401k plan? I mean, absolutely not. And so we have to realize from a practical perspective that even though the long-term approach is so important for employees to be able to retire with dignity and have good memories of the place where they worked, and frankly, for them to be able to retire on time when the company's ready for them to retire and the employee's ready to retire, that magical point in time, the short term and the midterm mean even more. So when we're thinking about really that umbrella of financial wellness, Josh, we want to start thinking about, whether they have that foundation to get through the ups and downs in the short term and the midterm. We want to think about, for example, how many employees have emergency savings accounts in place, right? And is that 3 to 6 months? Is it 1 to 2 weeks? Like, what does that really look like? So we're looking at their savings needs. We're looking at their debt load. We want to better understand whether employees are taking positive steps to managing their debt and whether they're paying off the right type of debt at a faster rate maybe than the other debt that might be at a lower interest rate, for example. We want to make sure that they're starting to understand what sort of college savings needs might be for their children. You think about anybody who's listening to us who's been involved in that planning for your children's college education, or you're in the middle of it right now, you see the pace at which those expenses have grown, really kind of astronomically outpacing the cost of inflation and the cost of other goods and services. And so it's much broader to really answer your question, Josh. But let me be really specific. I just mentioned a few examples. Well, okay, that sounds great, but what good are those examples if an employer and whatever sort of company and consultant they're working with don't start to try to measure that information, right? What good is it for us to say, well, we want to know how many people have an employee savings account and what they have in that kind of emergency account? What good is it for us to just look at that at one point in time if we don't measure it again in a year, and we don't measure it again in a year, and we don't measure it again in a year? So a lot of that, Josh, is going to be about identifying 5, 6, 7, 8 aspects of somebody's overall financial picture and being willing to try to survey and poll employees and look at that data and actually manage and measure it to see if we're improving as time goes on.
Well, and Matthew, I know we're gonna touch on why all this matters towards the end as we're discussing this. But one of the things you mentioned with the individual employees, with their debt, with the budgeting, with the emergency fund, you and I are old enough that when we were young, we had to deal with those issues outside of work. There really wasn't an opportunity to be handling any of those things in the middle of our workday. That's not the case now.
No.
And if somebody's under that stress, they've got all the instruments in the world to be working on that. Is that fair? And that's not to point a finger at somebody. We've all been there. We've had medical bills and we've had things arise. And quite honestly, it can be pretty distracting. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's one layer to be a little bit distracted mentally and be thinking about other things while you're in the middle of your workday. But now one of the worst aspects of how we can get in touch with information, particularly through our cell phones, is we now have a place to go and act on, that sort of anxiety that we're feeling. And so the amount of time that people actually spend beyond merely being distracted, it starts to really take away from their productivity. And you've got a lot of financially stressed employees who are spending, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a week working on that while they work. Does that sound like a lot at first? Well, probably not. But if you took all of your employees within a company and you said, hey, how would you feel if all of your employees were 10 to 15% less productive? Yeah, we'd probably have some aggregate issues there when we roll all that up together. So you're right. I mean, not only are employees distracted by it, but they now have a place to go act on that distraction by becoming further distracted when they do it.
And Matthew, on your previous chart you had up with the history of financial wellness, I appreciate that. One of the questions that would naturally lead from that would be, one, well, how do you deliver financial wellness? And then two, at the very end of your history is, the CARES Act, COVID comes in. How do you deliver these things in a COVID world? How's it been impacted by that?
Well, and that was a tough enough question even prior to the pandemic, when we had that kind of normal work setup where a lot of people were working in the same place, or at least you had, multiple offices, but almost everybody was going into an office almost every day. And what we've seen from the pandemic, and this I believe applies for the rest of 2020, I believe it applies in 2021. And I think it's going to apply even after that because of the way in which so many companies have changed where their employees will work. We've got to figure out a way to combine technology and in-person meetings to still provide people person-to-person service when it comes to their financial wellness. I mean, somebody's money is incredibly personal to them. I mean, there are not many issues that are more personal than somebody's own financial situation. And so it makes sense that even as we as a society have become more dependent upon technology to gather information and to be connected in some way with other people, people still want to deal with people when it comes to their money. So what we've got to be able to do, Josh, as we move forward, is we need to look very specifically at every company individually. We need to look at a company and we need to say, how has your workforce changed the way that it's working or where it's working from where it was, 6 to 12 months ago? Number two, is that permanent? Is that going to remain the case, as we come out of this or we establish some new sense of normal? Number three, Once we know all of that, how many employees can we get to in person versus how many will we have to reach remotely? And then number four, and this really goes back to that philosophical commitment, Josh, how do we put a plan in place where we're actually trying to connect with people?
Right.
This doesn't need to be that old kind of, hey, we're going to make somebody available and they're going to have a webinar and you can get on it if you want to. Well, what good is that if you get incredibly low attendance rates? What good is that if the employer is not saying, let's track our attendance? Let's see what kind of real engagement that we get from people. So that would be probably my overarching comment, Josh, as employers look to set up wellness programs, they need to hear from those sorts of, service providers and vendors and wellness consultants that have said, hey, this is the way in which we've changed as a result of the pandemic, and we feel it's important for you to measure whether we're actually engaging your people. It's not just contacting people, Josh, now that they're spread out, it's true engagement. How do we engage them? And I think that'll be the ultimate test or the ultimate standard as we move forward.
Well, you and I, in the chapter 1 of our series that we put together, we talked about how a lot of people in industry thought we were moving towards a low touch environment when it came to qualified plans. And you and I both agreed that if anything, we were really moving towards high touch. And my opinion is that COVID accelerated that. This is a high touch environment and probably will continue to be so for the foreseeable future. So
yeah,
Matthew,
I agree with that.
I'm sorry.
That's a very fair assessment. And it's something for us to recognize is that, and I guess what's kind of good about that, Josh, is that at least their needs and their wants, and so therefore the demand, they are in alignment. I mean, it's not one of these situations where we've diagnosed that employees need more, but employees are saying, nah, I want less. To the contrary, they need more and employees are saying, we want more. And so the fact that those are in alignment, that really speaks to employers that are trying to compete for labor, to try to attract talent, to try to retain talent, is to say, okay, we think people need this, but almost more importantly in that context, if employees are telling us they want it, or even more, that they expect it from an employer, well, then that's the case. Employers are going to start to see financial wellness as kind of a core employee benefit offering. And I think that's another issue that's going to continue to grow as a result of the pandemic.
Well, Matthew, with any issue, you have the how, you have the what, you have the why. And more often than not, the why is the strongest of those three parts. So, my question to you would be, and you and I have discussed this at length before, but why does all this matter? What, particularly in a COVID world, but we have financial wellness. It's on the radar of not just plan participants, but plan sponsors. We have a unprecedented global pandemic. And when I say unprecedented, I mean every single syllable of that word. It's unprecedented. So with all that said, why does all this matter? And what do you think, how do you think it will matter? What is the future of financial wellness?
Well, to figure out why it matters, I think there's probably two different perspectives to take there, and different people like to think about issues like this in different ways. So let's look at it from a cost perspective. That is the cost of not doing it well. And then let's look at it from more of the, glass half full, or the benefit aspect of actually doing it well. And so from that cost perspective, we've got significant data showing us, first of all, that financial stress is the number one form of stress that Americans feel. We also know then that when they're stressed, they're distracted, they're less productive, they don't come to work as often, they're less efficient when they're there, they don't stay with companies nearly as long, they don't develop that sort of loyalty, and they don't really start to view the company as a part of who they are. And that's such a dramatic departure from the way American workers worked in the past, where the company where they worked was a big part of their identity. The job that they had was a big part of their identity. Right. But as we as a culture have changed to where our job is not part of who we are, but merely what we do, if you've got financially stressed workers, the job's merely something that they do, and they're going to move around a lot more, and employees won't stay around. So that's kind of the cost, is that's the population of employees that a company ends up with. But let's look at that glass half full side. Let's think about employers that have said, we're going to invest in an employee financial wellness program. We're going to bring this much desired employee benefit program to them. We're going to devote our company to making sure that we do it well, we manage the data, because we see there's going to be a tremendous return on investment. And here's why they see that, Josh. They say, wait a minute, if we can curb or minimize that greatest form of stress, then our people will have less anxiety. And therefore, they're going to be less distracted when they work with us, and they're going to be more productive. And they're going to come to work more, and they're going to be healthier both mentally and physically. And when they do that, they're going to be better workers because they're more efficient. And frankly, they're happier. And then what happens is you get this cumulative effect, because when happy people are around others, they can have that contagious effect of making other workers feel better about what they do. And think about how that rolls all the way up or all the way down to the bottom line for a company. So if you're an employer thinking about this, Josh, and what's the future of financial wellness, I believe that employers will say, we want to invest in this because employees are telling us that they want it. They're telling us they expect it of us. We believe they need it. And guess what? It's good for our company. We make more money if our employees are happier, healthier, more productive, and they stay around longer. So at the end of the day, whether you're somebody who looks at things from saying, I just want to make my other employees happy, or we're saying, hey, I want to make sure that our bottom line is as healthy as it can be, I don't care. Those don't have to be mutually exclusive. The future of financial wellness is companies saying, we're going to do it because we all benefit when we do it.